Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I got a chance to sit down and play with the Simon Says Stamp November 2017 card kit that everyone is losing their minds over because it is fabulous. It has this beautiful, huge stamp set called Kind Flowers, and I took the large floral kind image as well as the individual kind stamp, and I have some Strathmore ready cut watercolor paper here, and I put it in my MISTI. And then I used my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper, and then I inked up these stamps with Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink. And then I'm going to coat them with Simon's antique gold embossing powder. And it's a good thing I had lined them up in my MISTI because I did miss a little part of the flower and a tiny little bit of the individual kind word I didn't press hard enough, or I didn't cover it with enough ink. So I'm going to fix that in a minute. I just used my heat tool to melt everything, and then I lined it back up in my MISTI, used my powder tool again, and then just kind of pressed the corner of the ink pad in those areas where I missed the most, because I don't really need to double stamp the entire thing. And this works. It's a little not perfect, I guess I would say, because this is such a detailed image that I kind of lost a little bit of the detail doing this, but I was still okay with it. If it really bothered me, I would have redone it on another piece of watercolor paper, but I decided to just do this, remelt those areas, and then it's good to go. So I melted that with my heat tool, and then I can set aside my mini MISTI, and I pulled out the Daniel Smith dot chart. This is the Debbie Hughes one. I've been talking about these a lot lately. I'm so excited that Simon has been releasing these little dot charts in different collections. They're basically like a try before you buy sort of a situation, because tubes of Daniel Smith watercolor can add up very quickly. You know, one tube ranges anywhere from $10 to $15 and then goes up from there. So having these little dot charts just give you a way to try out a bunch of different watercolor. And then if you find colors that you really love, you can get just the tube of that. And then the tube is going to last you. If you're a card maker like me, a tube is going to last pretty much forever. So, because I get a lot out of these little dot charts. I just love them. And all I'm doing with this image is I'm just using a really small brush. This is actually a silver size 2 brush. It's tiny. And most of the areas I'm wetting first with just clear water. And then I just touch my brush to the little dot of watercolor. It picks up the color, and then I can paint it. So I did that with most of the flowers and the leaves. And then these smaller areas, rather than get it wet first with water, I'm just picking up the color from the dot chart and then painting it onto the dry watercolor paper. That gives you a more kind of concentrated color. I wanted it really, really deep and dark. So I went on and did that, and then I watered down the one blue to do the outlines of those little blue flowers there, and got everything painted. And then for the individual kind sentiment, I got it wet first with clean water. And then I just very lightly touched the quinacridone coral watercolor very lightly and just added it to the very bottom of all these letters. And then kind of let it, normally you should just let it, do its own thing. Let it do its own thing, but I can't leave well enough alone. That's something I struggle with. So I just wet my brush with clean water again and just pulled it up. So it's kind of a fade, almost like a little bit of an ombre. So after doing that, I'm going to take my scissors here and I'm just going to fussy cut around this image, leaving a white border because that's just simpler. So I'm going to cut around this image, and then the individual kind word I'm going to die cut with the coordinating die that comes in the kit. It'll fit that word. It'll also die cut this one as well. I just decided to do it separately because I wanted to pop it on top of this to give it that extra little bit of dimension. So after I was done completely trimming out this piece, I'm going to line up that die, run that through my Big Shot machine. And while I was using my Big Shot, I also die cut one of the pattern papers from the pack with one of the Simon Says Stamp basic rectangles die. And then the cream colored cardstock in the kit, I cut in half, and I'm going to score it at 4 1/4. So it'll be a top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch A2 sized card. So scored that with my Teflon bone folder, and then pressed down that crease really well. And then I decided to use one of the green cardstocks from the kit just to frame this pattern paper, just to give it that little extra something and kind of pull out the green that I used like in the leaves. The cardstock goes really well with that green watercolor. I was kind of happy with just how that happened to work. So cut that to just slightly larger than that pattern paper. And then I'm going to adhere those together with my ATG adhesive. And then for the watercolored flowers and sentiment, I'm going to adhere those together with some foam tape. So I just ripped up little pieces of foam tape to put behind all of these letters in the die cut kind, making sure that none of the pieces like stuck out so that you could see them or anything like that. So just pop some foam tape onto there. And then I'm going to layer that right over the original one on the watercolor flower. I love this cluster. This set is so gorgeous. I will have a link to the kit. As of doing this voiceover, the kit is still available. I'm betting it's going to sell out right away. All our kits usually do, but this one's been super popular because it's fabulous. But the stamp set is available individually. Once the kit sold out, it's gone, but the stamp set is available individually and will be available in the future, and I highly recommend it. It's just gorgeous. So I popped up those flowers as well with foam tape. And then I wanted to add another sentiment. There's all these like narrow sentiments in the set, and decided rather than grabbing more cardstock, I just used another piece of this watercolor paper, and I'm just painting that deep same blue color onto the bottom. So I painted a strip of it, dried that with my heat tool, and when you dry watercolor, it kind of dries back a bit, so it's lighter. So then I added just a like deeper concentration of it as a second layer to really darken that up, so it was more of that like navy blue shade. So once that was completely dry, I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool on that again. So made sure it was completely dry, use my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to stamp this sentiment with that same Simon clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to use the antique gold embossing powder again. So these sentiments are really, really narrow. I'm kind of obsessed with sentiments like this lately. I love having, you know, large sentiments, large scripty sentiments, and then really, really narrow ones that you can add to kind of finish, you know, what it is you're saying on the front of your cards or on the inside, etc. I just love that. It just kind of ties everything together. So rather than cutting down foam tape, I used one of my little DEBBY'S foam strips because they're tiny and they're perfect for this. So I popped that on the back of this piece, and then pop that right below the kind word. And then I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to stamp and emboss another sentiment from the stamp set onto the inside of the card. I decided to keep the inside really simple. I'm not going to add any pattern paper. I was going to stamp the flowers all this, but decided to just keep it simple and just stamp another sentiment, and I'm going to heat emboss it with that same antique gold embossing powder, and it says, "Thank you for your kindness." So I use my anti-static powder tool, lined up the inside of the card on my grid mat, stamp the sentiment, and then I'm going to coat it with that antique gold embossing powder, and then melt that with my heat tool. So I do all that over a coffee filter, and then that way I can funnel all that embossing powder back into the container so that I'm not wasting a ton of it. So set that aside for a minute, funnel that embossing powder back into the container, and put the lid on before I end up knocking it over everywhere, because I tend to do that a lot. So did that. I was gonna pop this card front onto the card base with foam tape, but because I already had so much dimension with the flowers being popped up and then the sentiment being popped up, I decided just to adhere this flat to the card base. And then to finish off the embellishments, there's this little pack of gold foil leaves that come in the kit. So I decided to add a few of those, and I just added like fairly generous, it doesn't look like much on video, but it's a fair bit of multimedia matte adhesive just to the one end of the leaf, and then I would tuck it under this little flower cluster here. And then once this adhesive dries, like these are locked into place, like they do not move. So I just squeeze a generous amount and then adhered the 3 leaves, and then as a final little something, I couldn't resist, I'm obsessed. I used the Tonic Nouveau crystal drops in bottle green, because again, the green matched perfectly, so I had to use it. So added a few of those. I'm going to let this dry, and that finishes off my card. So I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have the pictures in the blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out in the description box below the video if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!